Okay, for this video, I thought I would illustrate how you might utilize the HLM program in order to analyze multi-level data. I've been kind of working with SPSS mainly in a lot of my examples, so I don't really spend a lot of time with this program, but I'm familiar with it enough to kind of give you sort of a rundown of some of the features involved in the program. So at any rate, what I did was I just downloaded a student version of this software. If you go to this particular website right here, ssicentral.com/HLM/student.html, you can download a free student version of the program. It has certain limitations in terms of cases, groups, that you can incorporate at level 2 or whatever, and certain numbers of effects. But it's really good for just kind of getting your feet wet and learning about HLM. And then if you wanted the full version, you could certainly get a copy of that at this website as well. So there you go. That's my plug. Okay, so the example that I am going to draw from is actually from chapter 13 from this textbook right here. At this website, I just kind of downloaded the data sets from the book. The data set itself also appears in an earlier version of James Stevens' text, Intermediate Statistics. So it's essentially a counseling example. A lot of the examples that you'll see with HLM will incorporate school level data, things like that. So one of the nice things about this example is that it illustrates a different kind of use of the program and sort of in a different context. And basically the context is that if you can imagine having data on clients within, let's say, different counseling groups and so forth. So the clients would be nested within different groups, and those groups might receive a different type of treatment, a treatment approach. And so the idea is that those individuals that are nested within those groups are probably going to be more similar on the outcome variable than perhaps across those groups. So the nesting structure kind of lends itself to a multi-level analysis. So the data that I have right here, this was downloaded from that website with a couple of additions in here. But basically we have a variable that's called client ID. We have each client all the way up to client 40 in this data set. We have clients 1 through 4 nested within group 1, 5 through 8 nested within group 2, and so forth. Each client has a score on empathy, which is actually the outcome variable, the level 1 outcome variable in the example. And then a predictor variable at level 1 called contentment. And then each group received either a new treatment, which happened to be coded 0 in the data set, or were a member of a control group, which was coded 1 in the data set. Now, if you're running the multi-level analysis using SPSS, you'll have all of your data within basically a single file. And so you run the analysis using that program in that kind of way. For the HLM program, things are structured a little bit differently, where basically you need to have a file that contains level 1 information and a file that contains the level 2 information. So what I did was I created 2 separate files, and so you'll see right here, this is an SPSS file. We have the client ID, the group identifier, and then the client level 1 outcome variable, and the predictor variable at level 1. So notice that all the clients within a given group are going to receive the same treatment. So that's the reason why treatment is not being utilized at the level 1 or utilized at level 1, but rather it's going to serve as a level 2 predictor of variation in the outcome variable across the groups. So the outcome variable is empathy, and like I said, the level 1 predictor is contentment. notice that this file needs to incorporate the group level identifier, or the level 2 identifier. So each person still is associated with a given group. The other data set at level 2, you'll notice that I still have the level 2 identifier. You'll notice that we had 10 groups in this particular data set, and this is really kind of insufficient data, but we're basically just kind of giving an example of the use of HLM in a different context, where in this case we don't really have a lot of groups and we don't really have that large of a sample size, but nevertheless we're focusing mainly on illustrating procedures. You'll notice that I've got a mean contentment score for each group. So basically what I did was I took all the individuals at level 1 and computed the mean level of contentment. So if I take the average contentment score for persons 1 through 4 who happen to be in level 1, then that mean is this value right here. And so, and then we also have the method associated with each group. So the code of 0 was the new intervention, a code of 1 being an old intervention. So we'll open up HLM, the program. So this is it right here. And what we have to do is we have to first, we'll say, okay, I need to make a new MDM file. So the data are basically integrated into a multivariate data matrix file, and then the analyses kind of proceed from there. So we have to kind of begin. We can either, create a new model using an existing file, or we can make a new file. And so we're just going to start off by making a new file. So what that means is I have to import the data from SPSS or whatever program into HLM. So I'm going to click on Stat Package and Input. You'll notice that I've got several options here about what kinds of HLM models. We're going to stick with HLM2 right here and click on OK. So now the first step is I need to import the data. So you'll see it says level 1 specification, level 2 specification. So I'm going to click on level 1 specification, and this is my level 1 data, and I'm going to click on it. And then level 2 specification, I'm going to click on it as well. You'll notice that it asks if you have missing data in the data set, and then there's an option for when the missing data are going to be dealt with. So in this particular data set, there's no missing data that's present, so we're just going to leave it on no. The next step is I need to choose the variables that's going to be included in my analysis. So I'm going to click on Choose Variables, and I'm going to include empathy and contentment. So empathy was my outcome variable at level 1, contentment was my predictor variable at level 1. And then I need the variable that reflects the group identification, or the level 2 identifier. So I'm going to click on ID here. So we're not going to include this variable in the matrix, but we do still need the identifier. So I'm going to click on OK. And then at level 2, I'm going to go back to the identifier, click on ID here, and then if I want to incorporate these other predictors, I can incorporate them as well. So I'm including those in the matrix. So now the next step is I have to essentially save the data file. And before you can even actually create the data file, you have to essentially create and save a template. So you'll notice, like if I just type in, let's say I'm just going to call this counseling example, or EX, and then always you want to still incorporate the MDM suffix right up here. So it explicitly says be sure that when you're saving your MDM file to incorporate that suffix. You'll note that if I click on Make MDM, it's going to say you need to save the response file, and so I really have to just kind of come up here and click on this. Notice too, really quickly, I didn't mention this, but when you're importing the data and laying this out, you also need to indicate whether you're dealing with cross-sectional data, longitudinal, and so forth. So we're just going to stick with persons within groups, and there you go. So now I'm going to click on Save MDM File, and so you can see I've been kind of playing around with this before, so I'm just going to call this template just to be completely non-descriptive, and I'll click on save here. And so now when I click on make MDM, you'll see that I get descriptive statistics at each level. So you can see, the mean contentment score, or the mean of the group averages was 30.23 standard deviation. So this is the taking the group level averages and averaging those and computing a standard deviation. These are the means and standard deviations at level 1. So now, after doing that, I can click on Done, and so now you see that it opens up, the program opens up, and so you've got various options. The first step in this process is I need to identify an outcome variable. So I'm going to click on empathy, and you'll notice it says outcome variable. So I'm going to click on that, and so now you get essentially an intercept only model where empathy is the outcome variable. In terms of, if empathy was, if I wanted to change the scale of empathy, I can click on outcome, and I can, right now the default is normal, so treating outcome as a normal continuous variable. But if there were other types of distributional characteristics, I could use those as well, but we're going to stick with this. Under basic set, well, that was the basic setting. There are other settings as well. We're not really going to spend any time on that, but just at this point, we're just going to test the intercept only model. So with the intercept only model, just kind of note that, this is, there are no predictors at level 1. And this is essentially the intercept, which is nothing more than the mean at level for a given group on empathy. And so, and then the residual is just the deviation of the individual score from that group mean. You'll notice that at level 2, this is the grand mean of the intercept. So if we take the average of the intercepts across the group, and or if we take the intercepts across the groups and average them out, we get the grand mean of those intercepts, which is essentially the grand mean on our dependent variable. And then this is the random effect, or the random component right here, which is the deviation of a given group's intercept or mean from the grand mean of those intercepts or means. So at any rate, we will now go to run analysis. And, whoops, let's see what happened here. Okay, so looks like we just had a little bit of a glitch. So if I go to run analysis, you'll notice that we have a couple of options. We could either save as and then run, or just run the model shown. I'm just going to run the model as shown. And so now you can see that it's running, and there you go. Here's our output. So you'll notice that we get, in our output file, we've got the final estimation of the fixed effects. This is the estimated grand mean on empathy. So, again, taking the intercepts across all of the groups and computing the average of those, that's the grand mean. So the average empathy score in the sample was 20.625. There's a significance test right here, but we're not really, most of the time, you're not really terribly interested in testing whether there's a significant intercept. So just kind of scrolling down, though, you'll notice that we have the variance components described down here. So we've got the level 1 residual. So this is basically an estimate of the within group variation, and then this is an estimate really of the between group variation. And this is nothing more than a significance test to test whether this variance component is significantly different from 0. And so in this case, it looks like that would be the case. And so really what that would do is that tells us that there's probably variation in the groups to be accounted for by adding in a level 2 predictor, such as, for instance, counseling intervention. So let's just do that. Let's just take a quick look at adding in counseling interventions. Let me clear that off. And I'm going to go under HLM here. And so back to this. And I'm going to, now you can see I'm going to go to click on level 2. and you'll notice we have the method variable. So now I have the option of adding in a predictor of the variation in the intercepts. So, in SPSS, really what we're doing is, we would be taking this equation here and substituting it directly in here. And so you don't really see things quite as clearly as you do with the HLM program. The nice thing here is you actually see the predictors at each level. So I'm going to click on method, and I'm going to add this variable as uncentered, given that it's basically coded 0 and 1. And now you'll notice that, so now what we're doing is we're predicting the random variation in the intercepts. So we have the grand mean of the intercepts plus the regression of the intercepts onto method, and then we also have the variation that is unexplained by the predictor, which would be the counseling method. So at this point, we're going to run the analysis. So we'll go to run analysis, run the model shown, and to wait a minute. Okay, there we go. And so now you'll notice that we have our level 2 predictor, which was method, and you can see that we have a coefficient of negative 6.45. And you can see that we have a p-value really kind of indicating that it's not significant. Ordinarily, you would have a directional hypothesis, I would think, but the illustrations provided in the textbook, I don't believe they go in that direction. So if we assume a non-directional hypothesis and just are testing whether there's a difference, we would conclude that there's no difference. But, theoretically, I would expect that, being in the new treatment group relative to the old or the control group, maybe there would be gains. And so given the coding, we had a code of 0 for the new treatment, and then we had a value of 1 for method for the control group. That would tell us that essentially the new treatment group actually had the higher mean than the control group. It just wasn't significant if we're testing with a two-tailed criteria. Scrolling down, the other thing to note too is that you actually have a couple of boxes right here or tables. This one is for robust standard errors, but you'll notice that the program already kind of says, this is only appropriate for data sets having moderate to large number of level 2 units, and the data does not meet that criteria. So we really need to be just focusing on interpreting this table up here. And then in terms of the variance components, you can see that here's the variance for the intercepts after controlling for method effects, or the method counseling method, and you can see we still have significant variation, suggesting then that we could theoretically continue to add in additional level 2 predictors of the variation. So another possibility, let's say that we wanted to add in a level 1 predictor, like the individual level of contentment. So we could do that as well. This little button right here is telling us, moving us back and forth between levels. So if I click on level 1, we have the level 1 predictor contentment. And so we have several options. Oh, excuse me here. We need to kind of make sure we're at, level 1, level 2. Yeah, level 1, and we'll do contentment, and we can say, well, we can decide to add the variable uncentered or group centered or grand mean centered. So I'm just going to go ahead and add this variable as grand centered right here, and so you can see there's our predictor variable. And so now we have a level 1 predictor, which is contentment, as a predictor of variation in empathy. We also have the level 2 predictor instructional method, which is predicting the variation in the group intercepts. You'll notice now that we've added in this predictor at level 1. Now we have the beta subscript 1, and so you'll see it fills in right here. And the gamma 10 is reflecting the average slope for contentment across all of our 10 groups. and we don't have a random component in here. So if we wanted to allow the slope to randomly vary, we could just kind of click right here and allow that to randomly vary. I'm not going to focus in on that right now, but we're just going to treat the relationship between contentment and empathy at level 1 as not varying across groups. So we're still assuming that we have variation in the intercepts across groups, which is the beta 0, and that some of that variation is accounted for by the counseling method, but we're treating the slope as being fixed at level 1. So now when I run the analysis, you'll see that here are our results. So we've got, you'll see that we've got again, there's the intercept. That's the essentially the grand mean of the intercepts adjusted for the predictors in the model. And then we have the difference between the two instructional method approaches in terms of the intercepts across between the groups. And then for the contentment variable, we also have essentially it says the slope right here, which is 0.3596, and we see that that is a significant predictor in the model. So basically, what this is telling me is that yeah, we still have a significant. Now you'll notice that adding in our level 1 predictor. That the difference in between the two groups, it becomes statistically significant. So there is a significant difference between the groups, between the those groups that received the new intervention versus the control intervention, and the difference in means is kind of reflected right here, and then you've got contentment. You can see that there's a positive relationship or positive predictive relationship at level 1. Basically, as with higher levels of contentment, we also saw that there was higher predicted levels of empathy. So moving on and kind of scrolling down a little bit in terms of our variance components, we still see that our variance component between groups is actually decreasing, and we still see that we have significant variation in the intercepts even after incorporating the level 1 predictor and the level 2 predictor. So, but we do see that there is a decrease in the variance component. So that basically kind of provides a very rough overview of some of the approaches with the HLM program. I didn't want to go into a lot of depth, but just to kind of orient you to the program and some of its options. Obviously, if we added in a level, allowed the slopes to randomly vary, then we could also build in, theoretically, we could look at cross-level interactions. Essentially, we could have said, well, maybe the slopes, if we allow them to randomly vary across groups, we could also add in, something like a group level contentment as a moderator of the relationship between individual contentment and empathy. And so I could have built in, that a group level variable. This is just kind of an example, and then modeled the cross level interaction. But we're not going to go there in this particular video, but again, this was just kind of highlight some of the ways in which you kind of can use this program in order to answer some questions, at least with 2-level data.